What's going on, you guys? Thanks so much for tuning in to the channel today. The Montreal Canadiens are officially at the All-Star break slash bye week, and I wanted to talk about the Canadiens' top 5 storylines so far this season, most of which are actually positive. Despite them being in another down season, they're 26th overall in the NHL right now, likely to miss the playoffs, but there are some positive storylines that I want to touch on with you guys. But before we do that, as a little added bonus just to start this game, let's talk about last night's game real quick against the Pittsburgh Penguins, the last game before this break here. And you know something, the Canadiens had a decent game, and I thought it was actually one of Juraj Slafkovsky's best games of the season. Obviously, he scores his 7th goal, his 20th point of the season, but in general, I thought he was very, very noticeable last night with the puck and had the best chance in overtime to get the winning goal, frankly. And actually, Cole Caulfield had the other one. So I thought that it'd be worth talking about because there was some interesting storylines coming out of last night's game as well. Our old boy, Lars Eller, we used to call him Larry, right? Playing in his 1000th career NHL game, and he ends up scoring his 9th goal of the season for the Pittsburgh Penguins. He's had himself a career. He went and won a Stanley Cup with the Washington Capitals, and he was a lot of fun to have on the Canadiens. The biggest memory that sticks out for me is well, he got hit really bad actually when the Canadiens were playing the Ottawa Senators in the playoffs years ago, and Brandon Prust stood up to him, and the coach for the Ottawa Senators, his name is Paul. He had the big walrus. It's not Paul Maurice. I'm just trying to remember his name off the top of my head right now, but for some reason it's escaped me. You will correct me in the comments. But he had the whole, big bug-eyed walrus comment Brandon Prust did when defending Lars Eller because the coach couldn't even say his name. He just said his number and seemed to disrespect Lars Eller at the time. But Lars Eller then, in his career with the Canadiens had a 4-goal game, including a penalty shot in that 4-goal game, and it was actually a heck of a lot of fun. And what a special night it was to see a Canadiens player score 4 goals. So that was pretty special too, right? So in the game last night, Caden Gooley gets his 4th goal of the season, assisted by Matheson and Cole Caulfield. And we saw one heck of an assist from Sidney Crosby. Let me tell you, if you guys watched that game last night, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Crosby didn't even look. He knew exactly where he was putting the puck on his backhand, but it was a backhand no-look pass to Jake Gensel for his 22nd of the season. And my gosh, it was vintage Sidney Crosby. You can't even hate that play, even though it's scored against your own team. That's the kind of player Sidney Crosby is, right? The great players will score against you, make a great play against you, and you're just like, all right, well, that was impressive. Nothing negative to say there because nobody was going to stop that play. Nobody's going to stop that puck. So just a beautiful play from Sid. Got to love it. Still one of my favorite players of all time. Marcus Pettersson ends up getting the overtime winner after Caulfield and Slafkovsky cannot capitalize in overtime, and Mike Matheson ends up getting a 2-on-1 against him, and Pettersson just roofs it for only his 2nd goal of the season. So that's that, and the Canadiens get the loser point in overtime and remain now 9 points out of a wild card spot at the break here. So let's talk about these 5 top storylines for the Montreal Canadiens for this season so far. And I tried to think about the most relevant ones that you guys would care about. So that's the ones I put together here. So at number 5 coming in here is the 3-way goalie rotation that the Canadiens decided to roll out with to start this season, right? With Sam Montembeault, Jake Allen, and keeping Caden Primo, not putting him on waivers, not wanting to lose him to waivers. So they still, as of this moment, have all 3 goaltenders with the franchise, with the team. So far, Sam Montembeault is leading in games played with 23, Jake Allen in second with 17, and Caden Primo has played 11 games. Naturally, Sam Montembeault, I mean, he's a big story because he signed a 3-year extension with the Montreal Canadiens after having a pretty good start for himself, having a lot of games where he really stood out. And, a 310 goals against average, which, can be credited to the defense. Also, it's not a great goals against average, but he has a 905 save percentage for this season, and he's had plenty of nights where he was 920, 930 and above. So the numbers don't do it justice. It's just there were some bad games for the Canes, like that 9-4 game against Boston where Sam was in for 8 goals. So the numbers don't reflect how good Sam Montembeault has actually really been this season. And shout out to Jake Allen last night against Pittsburgh. He had a really good game too. He made a lot of good saves overall. So Caden Primo has had some good, encouraging starts as well. Jake Allen's numbers, if we look at his first, 3.43 goals against and a 901 save percentage, whereas Caden Primo, 3.36 goals against average and an 899 save percentage. So not great numbers for Primo. And Jake Allen is potentially on the trade block coming up here at the deadline. But they've gone with the 3 goalie system, and they're going to keep it until the trade deadline or sooner if there's enough interest for Jake Allen before that. Some people thought maybe Caden Primo or even Sam Montembeault would be going to Edmonton if Edmonton was interested, but Sam's been signed to a 3-year extension, so that's not going to happen. Most likely Jake Allen is going to be the one to fall first, if you will. But he knows that, and he's been a great soldier so far, so all the power to him. At number 4, the Kirby Dach injury. Now, this injury really early on, second game of the season, really rattled the Montreal Canadiens and their fan base, including myself, of course. Seeing him get 2 assists in his first game, playing alongside Alex Newhook and Juraj Slafkovsky, looking like that line was going to be something to keep an eye on through the rest of the season. And sure enough, in game 2 against Chicago, Jared Tenorti, former Montreal Canadian, takes out Kirby Dach at the bench. He gets an ACL and MCL injury, and he is done for the season. So we know how the impact it's had on this season, right? Despite that, though, the Canadiens have still played pretty well despite the Kirby Dach injury, although we know how much we've missed him. And, being the centerman that he was going to be, he was destined for a breakout season, as many of us have continued to talk about this season, right? And he just didn't get that chance. So hopefully he can come in next year and really become that top 6 center, top 6 forward that we've all gleaned from him to be. He's a big guy, a skilled guy. He shows he can have a physical element to his game, which wasn't a big factor or wasn't a big consideration of his game when he came to Montreal. He was more of a skill guy, right? And you heard the interview with Kirby Dach on the Raw Knuckles podcast that in Chicago they wanted to make him a third line shutdown center. Wasn't going to work, right? The Canadiens clearly saw a lot more in Kirby Dach, and it shows because he was becoming something special and still is. So next season, we expect a lot from Kirby Dach. Coming in at number 3, Shawn Monahan's bounce back. We've seen Shawn Monahan have a nice season so far. In fact, he's 3rd in scoring right now for the Montreal Canadiens after 49 games played, having played in all games so far this season, 13 goals, 22 assists, 35 points in those 49 games. And he's found himself right at the top of the trade bait board for TSN and other outlets where the Canadiens and their fans, some are on the fence whether they want to see Shawn Monahan get traded or not, because he's still got a lot of value at 29 years old. He plays great hockey. He plays the most consistent hockey of anybody on the roster right now, maybe other than Nick Suzuki. But Shawn Monahan is a great player, and he's shown, how valuable he can be to the Canadiens and maybe how valuable he's going to be on the trade market. So we'll see what happens with Shawn, but you can't deny the fact that after, last year when he came in and Canadiens took on his contract and a first-round pick for nothing, it was a great story. He had a great start to last season, then got injured, and then we couldn't do anything with him because the plan was last year to move him at the trade deadline, and now the plan is pretty much the same this year, only Shawn Monahan is still healthy this time. So, and also he re-signed this year for a very low cap hit of $1.98 million. So been a great story so far for the Montreal Canadiens. Coming in at number 2, Arber Xhekaj. Arber Xhekaj getting sent down to Laval, where he had a pretty good stint with the Laval Rockets, 17 games played, but, fans were just kind of frustrated and unsure why he was getting sent down. Some fans were, because, they felt like he's a better defenseman than, say, Justin Barron, who got sent back down to Laval last week. And Justin Barron came out starting pretty good this season, and then we saw him kind of maybe the NHL game load got to him a little bit throughout the season here, and he just couldn't seem to handle it and started making more mistakes. And then Arber Xhekaj eventually got called back up, but we saw Arber Xhekaj go down and form a pretty good dynamic duo with Logan Mailloux in the AHLs with the Laval Rockets. So possibly a future pairing to be reckoned with Arber Xhekaj and Logan Mailloux at some point in the future. But it looks like the time in Laval did Arber Xhekaj some good. He even got scratched again last night because a couple games ago against the Islanders, he did get a couple penalties, which he learned from, and, still has to work on his discipline and his defensive play. But it seems like that was worked on, and he's going to continue working on it. But it was a story, though, having him be down in Laval for so long. The fans just couldn't wait for him to come back up, and then he finally did last week, and we saw him come in, do his thing. Nothing really flashy, nothing really stood out majorly. He hasn't fought yet in the NHL, but he had some really good development time in Laval. He put up some points. He got some fights in there. He played some hard-hitting hockey and formed a good duo with Mailloux. So a good story so far. All right, so I do have some honorable mentions, by the way. I want to let you guys know that before I get to the number 1 story so far this season. But I think we can all agree that the number one story so far this season has been the development of Juraj Slafkovsky, the quick development of Juraj Slafkovsky. Believe it or not, Slav actually finds himself in the top 5 in scoring with the Canadiens this season. He's actually at number 5 in scoring with 7 goals and 13 assists for 20 points in 49 games this season. So Slav has taken a big step forward, and the biggest piece of his development was his play away from the puck, his defensive awareness, working on his defensive game. Marty St. Louis, we know him and how he wants to teach the guys how to play without the puck and how to make reads and how to not just play in systems, but utilize concepts within a system, right? So Juraj Slafkovsky really has taken a big step forward. And for a 19-year-old, it's been impressive what we've seen from him this season. We've seen his offensive numbers have an uptick here. He's got 20 points in 49 games. Last year, he had 10 points in 39 games last season, and this year 20 points in 47 games. So regardless of how many points or how many games it takes him to get how many points he has, he's taken a big step forward in his development, and we've all seen that he can play a lot more physical. He got in a bit of a fight with the Buffalo Sabres. We've seen him get a little chippy, a little chirpy, right? We've seen him in his all-around game be a lot more noticeable on the ice, getting more confident with the puck. Even last night in Pittsburgh, I mean, you saw him get an overtime shift, and he created himself a breakaway, which was all utilized by his skating and his physical ability and his puck handling ability, right? So we even saw the Buffalo Sabres. He got the shootout winner, right? And had a great shootout winner, a great game, opportunities. And last night, even in the Pittsburgh game, Slav had a lot of scoring opportunities. He should have had at least 2 or 3 points, at least 2 goals. He actually had a pretty good opportunity that he missed, was basically missed an open net, and he didn't hit it. But the main point is Slafkovsky has had a great overall first half of the season here. Really encouraging signs from the big forward here, the big Slovakian, where, everyone was wondering if he should go to Laval. He still has never gone to Laval to play a single game there for any development. The Canadiens feel like he is going to develop at the NHL, and there's no better place for him to develop. And so far, I think they've been right. I think it's hard to argue because we've seen his overall play. We've seen his increase in puck touches, his puck possession. We also saw the debut of Juraj Slafkovsky, Nick Suzuki, and Cole Caulfield, right? Before Slafkovsky even got drafted, he mentioned how he's ready and available to play with Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield. He's ready. He's here. That's what he said, right? And then sure enough, we saw this line play together for over 10 games this season, and we saw production out of those 3 guys. So very encouraging signs. Top story of the season so far goes to Juraj Slafkovsky for me. Some honorable mentions. Joshua Waugh getting his first recall from the Laval Rocket, having a good season so far with the Rocket and playing and scoring his first NHL goal. It was a good story. It was a time where the Canadiens needed an offensive boost, and Joshua Waugh came in and played half decently, I thought. Josh Anderson's goal scoring slump. It was a long scoring slump. It was a big topic of conversation among Habs fans and the media, and he eventually snapped it with a 5-game goal streak, 4 or 5 game goal streak, and then got a great ovation at the Bell Center and just endeared himself again to Habs fans. Got emotional. It was a nice moment because I think Josh Anderson has been a key piece that many teams have wanted to trade for, but we haven't wanted to give him up. Kent Hughes and the team, they don't want to do it, and they still have it. So Josh Anderson is still a valuable member, and I think frankly last night in the Pittsburgh game, you see him after the whistle getting involved in scrums, and I think he handled his business very, very well. So I really still like Josh Anderson as a player and as a leader on this Canadiens team. Patrick Roy's return to Montreal. That deserves an honorable mention. We all saw it last week. We talked about it in detail. Him returning as head coach of the New York Islanders and the story that it became. Unfortunately, the Montreal Canadiens came out with a win in that game after almost losing it. The Brendan Gallagher elbow happened at the end of that game, as we know, and the suspension of 5 games for Gally. So that night was still special with Patrick Roy's tribute during the national anthem and him returning to the Bell Center with his jersey in the rafters and being highlighted during the anthem. It was a special, special moment. Honorable mention to that. Mike Matheson deserves a shout out for being the Canadiens' top defenseman very, very clearly. Even though on nights where he has mistakes, he still plays the most minutes, 25 plus minutes on average a night for the Canadiens. He had that Bobby Orr-esque coast-to-coast goal we saw against the New Jersey Devils where it was all him and he scored from his own end. It was a beautiful play. It was a beautiful goal. He sits in 4th for scoring for the Montreal Canadiens right now with 7 goals and 27 assists, 34 points in 49 games for the Montreal Canadiens. And I think This next honorable mention comes from the defense as well, like I mentioned with Mike Matheson here, and that is that the Canadiens' the Canadiens were tied with the Colorado Avalanche at one point this season with goals from defensemen. A really cool thing. And I forgot to mention in Arber Xhekaj's story that Jayden Struble, technically Jayden Struble is sitting at number 2 for the top storylines, because that's why I wrote these down so I wouldn't forget. But the emergence of Jayden Struble in the NHL as a Montreal Canadien this season, when Arber Xhekaj went down to Laval, Jayden Struble, I knew some of you guys would probably let me know about this, but Jayden Struble has been a good story and a pleasant surprise for all of us as Montreal Canadiens fans on defense, playing a tough, smart game. A guy that can make a first pass out of his own zone, that can play physical, that uses his head, that can skate well. He can play physical, like I mentioned. He can drop the gloves if he absolutely needs to. So another great story there. That's all I got for you guys. Those are the top storylines so far this season for the Montreal Canadiens. If you enjoyed the video, please hit like. We're coming up on 5,000 subscribers, less than 50 away from 5,000 subscribers on the channel here. Please hit that button if you haven't, if you want to support Habs content like this, and I appreciate it. So thank you all very much for watching. We'll see you very soon. Thanks so much. Leave a comment down below. What are your top storylines for the Canadiens so far this season, which is still not always a great season to talk about. It's been a tough one at times, but let me know your favorite storyline so far this season. Thanks, guys. See you soon.